Well, hello and welcome to this webinar on using logic models to plan program evaluations with older adults. My name is Cheryl Eschbach and I am part of the North Central Region Aging Network. And we are a collaborative of extension professionals who work on issues related to health and well-being of older adults. And as gerontologists, we're very interested in enhancing and increasing knowledge about various aging-related topics. We have 2 different webinars monthly. The first Fridays are our gerontology webinars, and today's webinar is our 3rd Friday on professional development. So I look forward to sharing with you some information about logic models. I am with Michigan State University Extension, and we use logic models for planning programs in all areas, and they form the basis of our team and our individual plans of work. So we utilize them in a way that I think is helpful to know what we're measuring and help us stay on track with recording our number of participants and the number of events we have throughout the year. So I'm going to share with you an overview on using logic models. And this comes from my experience within the last 12 years of being at Michigan State University, serving in an evaluation specialist role where I help program teams develop logic models for their annual plan of works, but also for grant applications and special research projects that they do. And this overview is going to contain some understanding how logic models are a graphic illustration of a program, and we're going to talk about the key components: inputs, outputs, and outcomes. That terminology is important to understand when you're developing a logic model or just reading one. And then we'll explore how program evaluation is related to logic models and look at some examples that are focused on health programs with older adult audiences. So a logic model is a depiction of a program. It shows what the program will do and what it's meant to accomplish. And it has a very logical framework. So you read a logic model from left to right as if then, if then. If these relationships are in place, then it can lead to these intended outcomes. And a logic model through a picture is a way of describing and showing your program plan to others, and also can help you in developing an evaluation design for a program. So if we take an example from a program that we do with older adults, A Matter of Balance, and this is one of the programs that's listed on our NCRAN website as well, if you're curious more about this program. It's for falls prevention. So if we want to take a look at that if-then logic, if older adults participate in 8 2-hour sessions in a community class with coaches leading small groups in practical strategies such as problem solving and exercise training, then the older adults from these classes will reduce their fear of falling, increase their physical activity levels, and change their environment to reduce fall risk factors. So that's like taken right out of a logic model for A Matter of Balance, and you can see how the if-then logic combines together, so we're able to talk about what our programs do. And I think from a statement like this, you can tell a lot by the program just with this if-then statement. Logic models have a lot of different names depending on which discipline you come from, and so they can be called theory of change, a program action model, a model of change, a concept map, an outcome map. And the different naming conventions really all use these same core components of logic models. They just have different names based on where they came from out of disciplines. So the logic model is a framework. It describes all the relationships with the investments and the activities and the results. It's a really helpful place if you've ever had to join a project team. You can simply ask, do we have a logic model? Can you show that to me? Or if you're working with partners or stakeholders, say you're in a human services collaborative and you want to learn more about their program, I've had people ask for our program logic models out of extension, or it's just a good way to share what's happening in a one document. And they can really provide a common approach for integrating different planning implementation, and evaluation activities. And as I mentioned before, we use them at Michigan State University to really set up what we're going to report on for the whole year so that we can create all those various stakeholder reports that we need to create. So logic models start with the end in mind. It's about having the big goal in mind, what the program wants to accomplish, what it should or what it can do, and it forces you to plan with that end in mind. And so when a program's successful, what would that look like? And then what did it take to get there? So if we wanted to help keep older adults to maintain their healthy nutrition, we would need to address senior hunger and nutrition issues. And so we may plan a program that focuses on healthy eating tips for older adults. So common terms found throughout the logic model include these various components here. And the goal is typically a really overarching statement about what the program hopes to accomplish. It can be pretty grandiose, even real big picture goal. And then SMART objectives help us create those more specific and measurable milestones within a project. So a logic model can have a 1-year annual program, or it could be many years. It could be 3 to 5 years, what you hope the program accomplishes. And SMART objectives help set up those milestones so you can have projections or certain things that you're following along the way to see if you're reaching the stepping stones on the way to that larger goal. And then logic models become what we call like a roadmap. It includes all these pieces working backwards if we have impacts and outcomes to what are the outputs and the activities, and then what are the inputs needed. So if we have that big goal in mind, we can start planning down to what are all the pieces we'll need to invest in this program. In the most simplest form, there's resources that go into a program, and we call these inputs. And the inputs then lead to, if we put inputs in, investments in, they lead to activities that we do that are called outputs. And then if we have outputs, like number of people and number of events, we can lead to actual change of participants that we call outcomes. And so I'll be coming back to the simplest form, but also expanding and building upon the simplest form, because this is really the core of a logic model. And you can see that if-then logic happening. That's why the arrows are showing that direction. If we have these inputs and investments, we can have these outputs. And then if we have these outputs, we can get to these outcomes. So I will spend just a little bit more time on that language. From my experience of working with extension professionals, sometimes people get pretty frustrated with these terms. They think they're the same, and they're not. And I recognize that that can be a source of frustration or misunderstanding. So I do like to take just a little bit of time to flesh out the difference between outputs and outcomes, because when it comes to logic models, they really are different concepts. And both of them are really critical and core to the logic model. So outcomes are the anticipated results of all the program activities collectively combined. And they can be on a continuum from short to long term. And then outputs are the actions taken by the program that are trying to lead to that change. And there's different types of outputs. Outputs can be activities, they can be products, and they can be the participation. So we'll look more deeply in that with our examples. Because one thing I think is helpful, if you're new to logic models, or maybe you're already seasoned in them and you want to show others how to write them, is to think about the type of language that we use to write the components of a logic model. So the inputs, which are the program investments, it's what we invest. Typically in extension, this is actually our educational program. That's the bread and butter of what extension does, but it can also be other educational products. But the inputs are nouns. They're all things. It's the people, it's the stuff, it's the time, it's the money. The inputs are the nouns that become a list on the left-hand side of the logic model. They're all the things we're investing into the program that set us up for outputs and outcomes. Outputs are also nouns. They are things, but they're tangible and they can be quantified. So outputs most typically are defined in two categories: activities and participation. And you'll see some logic models even have two columns, and then some logic models merge them all together. It's really a style thing. And you can see here, outputs are often listed as number of, and that's because it's setting it up to be tracked and reported against later. So number of clients reached, number of participants in a workshop, number of volunteers trained. Those are all things that you can put into a logic model that you can track and report on. The activities are verbs. So this is where you're going to want to have things written with a verb talking about what are you going to do with people. It provides the details of what will be conducted, the activities that will be tracked. So you're training the staff, you're developing partnerships, you're publishing educational materials to the website. It's the act of doing something that is being tracked and put into the logic model, which really will set up with what do you evaluate. You would want to probably evaluate all the activities. And then outcomes are directional adjectives. And they are usually on the very last column of the logic model. So if inputs started at the left-hand side, we have outputs in the middle and outcomes at the far right. And directional adjectives are they describe the change. And so in extension, you may have heard of CASA, and we have like acronyms for everything, but really we just mean improved knowledge, improved awareness, attitudes, or skills. And then sometimes you'll hear aspirations. Aspirations are motives to change or intentions to change, because sometimes when we teach people how to make diet changes or how to increase physical activity in their life, they might have a greater intention to change, but we haven't necessarily followed up or measured the actual change yet. So outcomes are can be a variety of things. Usually in short term, we do focus on changing attitudes or changing awareness. Maybe they build some knowledge and skills. And then the medium and long-term outcomes are more like, did people actually change their behaviors or their practices? Did you actually reduce some sort of incidence of pain or food safety? Something that is a bigger picture than maybe just knowledge or attitudes. So I'm going to return here to the simplest form of the logic model just so we can look at that again together, that the inputs lead to the outputs, and that there's outputs, there's outcomes. And then let's look at a real example from a program with older adults. We have the Powerful Tools for Caregivers. It's a 6 weekly classes, and the participants attend a class. So in this case, the Powerful Tools for Caregivers is the input. It's the resource we invest as extension to provide. And then the outputs would be the audience or the people who attend. So I could track the number of participants. I could track the number of classes. And then the activities would be teaching people how some exercise techniques, teaching them some relaxation strategies, teaching them ways to communicate with healthcare providers or encouraging them to get medical checks, talking to them about dealing with emotions so they can work on anger or guilt issues. And these are all things that we do, activities that we do in the Powerful Tools for Caregiver class. And then we look at the far right would be the outcomes of that. So overall, we really hope to help family caregivers take better care of themselves and take better care of the people that they're caring for as caregivers. So that's an example of, in the simplest form of a logic model, how it all connects together. Another example is the Stress Less with Mindfulness program. We have that here at Michigan State University. It's a 5-lesson series or a workshop. And again, that's the programs, the input we put into it. The activities are the participants who attend. And then the activities are also around identifying personal stressors. We have some group discussions that take place. We have some different hands-on activities they do during the workshop of like learning how to do mindful breathing, how to do certain movements to calm their mind and their body. And at the very end, when we evaluate, we're actually looking if older adults are able to learn these techniques and whether or not they intend to use them and incorporate a mindfulness perspective to change their own daily reactions to stress. That's 2 examples of older adult programs, and you can find more about those programs on our North Central Region Aging Network site under Programs and Resources. So let's take another look again at that simplest model, and now let's build upon it as a purpose for review and as just to show how complex these program logic models can become. So if we stretch that out now, we've got the inputs, outputs, and outcomes at the top. And you can see here the program investments are what we invest, and then the activities are what we do, and the participation is who we reach. So we're tracking all of that. And then we give an adequate amount of time, whether that's, you know, right at the end of the series or a follow-up, we would measure the outcomes from that educational event. And we can fill in these boxes of the different things that we would measure and how we would track that. Now, if I was to take this and fully detail out a logic model, this is a template for that. This is available off the National Institute for Food and Agriculture website. It's also comes back to the University of Wisconsin Extension and all the materials they have developed over the years, and I will give a plug to them. They have a wonderful online program of logic model training and resources available. But this is the kind of template that I know a lot of extension people print out, and they have it sort of in their toolbox, or next to their desks, to when they're doing program planning, or if they're trying to write something up for a grant, or even if they need to write a partner report. It helps them think about all those different pieces that go into our program. Sometimes we get really, we remember the program delivery and what we did, but it helps to step back and think about what were those other investments we made, including staff time, volunteers that we've had involved. Maybe even there's a co-facilitator or a partner on the program with us. And so these are all ways that we can take into account what were the investments for a program, what was the funding source, what was the research base that provided information for putting on this that we invested into the program, the equipment, technology. You get the sense there. It really fleshes out maybe even more ideas than just a program. The fully detailed logic model also incorporates some things outside of the 3 core areas that I've been talking about. It takes into account the situation, so needs assessments that we may have done, societal problems that we're trying to alleviate, stakeholder engagement, where did projects originate from, what kind of need came from the community that we are addressing. And then there can be priorities on top of situations where maybe our extension administration has a certain priority, or maybe the funder has a certain priority. So you can see here, this template is meant to be a guiding framework of thinking through all these elements that can be part of what influences your program logic model. It could be the mission or vision, the values, a variety of things can actually influence what we put in our logic model. Same thing at the bottom of the logic model, you'll see assumptions and external factors. Those are also filtering in to our program logic. We make a lot of assumption maybe about what extension can do, and we need to think about that sometimes. Does that in our mission? Do we have staff capable of doing these things? And then external factors. We may be running a really good program, but is there the right budget, or is there other things happening in the society that change program priorities? So these are all very flexible and fluid things that can impact our logic model. And then I also like this template because it gives a more detailed description of the outputs and outcomes that I've already covered, but it's all in one spot. So you can really think about, like, what did we do? We conducted some workshops or meetings, but did you also deliver a service? Maybe you put something up on a website in addition to having programs. It gets us thinking outside of just our program delivery and thinking about, did we develop a fact sheet? Did we develop an activity worksheet to accompany a program? Did we have to train staff or volunteers to help us deliver this? Did we work with the media to market or recruit people for the program, or to have an additional educational message? All these things that we might be doing, but if we don't take time to plan and capture that, we might forget to report on that because we are so focused on just program delivery or program evaluation. And the last thing I'm going to highlight on this is that if you look in the very middle of this slide is the word satisfaction. And satisfaction is placed under outputs because it's really not an outcome. It's a reaction and it's an attitude people have, but I know others do like to collect satisfaction. Satisfaction is placed here because we may ask our stakeholders or partners whether they're satisfied with Extension as a partner. We may ask partners or participants if they're satisfied with, like, where we implemented a program or what time of day we implemented the program, but that's not really going to help us inform the outcomes or the impact. Instead, that's going to give us good planning information to do better in that output section. So you'll see that's why satisfaction is listed underneath there rather than in the outcomes section. And then I'm going to just walk through kind of wrapping up these different pieces. Again, coming back to the core of the logic model, that the inputs are what we invest, and then the outputs are what we do and who we reach. And so if we detail that out in a logic model, we may be able to have different tracking or different ways of benchmarking how we're doing on our trainings or our outreach. And then outcomes are on a list of chain of outcomes or a continuum. They go from short to long term, just like that there's many words for a program logic model. There are also a lot of different words for outcomes, but this shows how the words still line up with the same kind of meaning. So you'll hear short term and then you'll hear learning outcomes, and typically those are the same level of outcomes. It's changes in knowledge and attitudes and opinions. Whereas medium, also called intermediate or action outcomes, are typically changes in actual behavior. So this might be something beyond even self-report, or you're checking in on an actual practice change or something actually completed. And then long-term conditional changes, much more difficult to measure. I rarely see this measured well in extension programs because this is really at very large levels. This is like improving the health and well-being of older adults. And that's difficult to measure, but it's still something that we place in our logic models because it's where we're headed. So returning to that idea of you start with a goal in mind, these might be some of the more lofty things we're trying to address, but they're very important to place in your logic model because they show how all the activities lead to them. And then we'll just return back to this template, again, encouraging you, if you haven't used this before, you can print out a copy of this either on the NIFA page or, the resources there for evaluation. Maybe we can try to get it up on the NCRAN site because it is a helpful tool for planning and planning program evaluation efforts. The University of Wisconsin Extension has put together a schematic like this that sort of takes a logic model and it overlays types of evaluation. And I think this is this would launch us into a different kind of conversation, but I wanted to end on this point because one of the things I hear is, why do we do logic models? What do we use these for? And one, that it's good to communicate your program, but two, it can really help you evaluate what's meaningful and what's important. So you'll see here, the yellow are all the different types of evaluation activities we do in extension, and then the logic model leading us through that same chain of events. So in the very beginning, you might have to do needs assessment to even know what kind of programs to offer. And then a process evaluation is really going to look at, how's the program being implemented? Is it reaching the participants that it intended to? Are there any adaptations or adoptions we need to do to the program to make it better? You'll see how satisfaction is part of participation. And then we lead to outcome evaluation and impact evaluation, where we're really taking a look at change. And that's the gold standard of a lot of our extension programs. They want to know what changes happened. And even in the impact side, sometimes that return on investment. So if you have extension administrators or project funders or others who are asking you for an ROI or a return on investment, if you set up a program logic model correctly, that is something that you are able to calculate, because you can look at how many staff did we have, what kind of training costs did we have, what was the program cost, and then how many people did we reach. And those values then become the pieces for calculating a return on investment, which I know, especially if a program's been implemented for many years, you know, people need to determine whether it's still worthy of resources, or if maybe more resources should go to that. So return on investment seems to be getting more popular in extension, and I think program logic models are one way that we could actually track that and document it in a realistic way. And with that, I'll say that today we covered these concepts, and I hope that you picked up a few tricks and new things about logic models and the terminology used within. And I just would like to say thank you to the North Central Region Aging Network for providing this webinar. And I will pause now for questions. Thank you.